Kyle here from allmediareviews.blogspot.com. I forgot to put the light on. Well, that makes a difference. Apologies on the other video I just made about the vinyl. I was going to do a video on the TV series The Goldbergs. So, The Goldbergs ended their series, the series finale. It was like the first week of May. It was the day we went off to Walnut Creek in San Francisco. My wife's birthday, I think it was May 4th. But the long story as short as possible about the Goldbergs. Of course, I was born in the mid-70s, 76, but I grew up in the 80s, so I'm a child of the 80s. And the creator of the Goldbergs, Adam F. Goldberg, not to be confused with Adam Goldberg, the actor, is about my age. I want to say he's maybe like a year older, somewhere in the, So but he grew up in the Philadelphia area, but he's Jewish, so I can relate to him in some ways in that sense too. But anyway, so the series The Goldbergs started in the fall of 2013. The thing about it, I was thinking, because I was watching some stuff with Psych, and they're going to make another Psych movie, and The Big Bang Theory, and they're talking about doing another spin-off of The Big Bang Theory. When The Goldbergs premiered on ABC, that was right when the point that Psych was about to end, and Breaking Bad was ending too, and The Big Bang Theory was still a show I was watching. My wife and I were watching, or my girlfriend at the time. But I don't think I found it to be as good. And we love like the pop culture and geek culture, nerd culture, and 80s references that they had on Psych especially, and on The Big Bang Theory, even going back to Gilmore Girls. But when Goldbergs premiered, it sort of kind of became this fresh, new kind of style voice of that kind of interest, and also the sci-fi elements to it. So it was really a breath of fresh air in some ways, and a show I enjoyed. I wasn't like blown away by it, but I also noticed how well Big Bang Theory and like even and like Freaks and Geeks I kind of was reminded of in some ways, because that was set it was very 80s-ish or early 80s, but I was reminded, it kind of filled that void is what I'm saying. It was a new sitcom that, included a lot of stuff, but it wasn't as popular. It didn't, throughout its peak at least, it never got to that same level of, acclaim, popularity, buzz, It wasn't a fad show nearly as big as The Big Bang Theory, and probably not as big as Psych even. But that doesn't really take away from how good it was. So it was set in the 80s, and it was these kids playing Adam Goldberg and his brothers. Well, they kind of had a liberty. He had an older brother named Eric, but, they cast an Erica instead. But, and I didn't really care the fact that there were some continuity issues, and there was, it was more of just the fun sort of comedic element. Some of it was the pop culture stuff from the 80s, whereas like TV, movies, toys, foods even, restaurants. A lot of it was based around like sort of theme of a TV show or a movie, especially though, which is cool. It's like, what 80s movie are they going to do next? Karate Kid, Back to the Future, Teen Wolf, Ferris Bueller. It was just, that was something to look forward to. They even did an episode on Rush. They had this one guy who was actually a saxophone player, but he was a Rush head. So there was, and Erica was in a band, they played Rush. So there was a lot to it. The cast was, while mostly unknowns to me, I knew the grandfather, and I'm spacing on his name now, from, I think it was Just Shoot Me. And he is a veteran actor that had been in a lot of other stuff. George Segal. So while he was a support player, he was a highlight of it, and the Adam character hung out with him a lot. The mother, Wendy McLendon-Covey, McCovey, she was... Yeah, Wendy McLendon-Covey, she had been in Reno 911. She had been in Bridesmaids. We'd seen just a few years before that. I kind of forgotten that, but she was kind of. She took things a little higher, to nth degrees of sort of the Jewish mother, the sort of possessive mother in some ways, but they kind of poked fun at that. Some of the Jewish jokes kind of hit home. There was one line where she was trying to do a Hanukkah, a year of Hanukkah with a Hanukkah tree, like a Christmas tree. And the grandfather said, well, is Aquaman gonna part the Red Sea and all this stuff? It was just stuff like that. You had Dan Fogler as the brother who I liked in Fanboys, and of course Dan Fogler, being that he was in Fanboys, actually Adam F. Goldberg was the writer, I believe, or the producer of Fanboys, because I was actually looking at Adam F. Goldberg's credits, and he actually hasn't done a lot of screenwriting himself that I can tell. He's been mostly a producer / creator and then showrunner of this show at the beginning. He did some other stuff. He's been doing documentaries since, but Jeff Garlin probably was best known for his work on Curb Your Enthusiasm, which I've never seen. I mean, I like some Seinfeld, but not that much, but a lot of people know him best for that. He's a comedian. So, I mean, the other people were mostly unknowns, the kids. Sean Giambroni and Troy Gentile. He was in that Hotel for Dogs movie I once saw. Haley Arantia, I guess, who played Erica, she had been in The Voice, like the second season or something like that. She's actually a musician, a singer, prior to actually being an actor, I think. Of course, you had Patton Oswalt as the narrator, which, yeah, I've grown to really like Patton Oswalt a lot, and, it fit. He was a good voice for the show. So, I mean, there was a ton of, episodes. It was kind of interesting because when we'd watch The Big Bang Theory, usually the new episodes, I was out at my girlfriend's, and she didn't have a DVR, so I'd have to watch it live. We couldn't pause it. And our dog always had to go out to go do her business at the time of that show. I would always miss it. So I'd watch it online, the next day. Sometimes I'd miss part of it. The same thing happened with the Goldbergs. It was just bizarre. Whether it was Thursday night at 7 o'clock, I can't remember. But it was just, she always had to go, and I was always the one having to take her, so I would miss a little segment or something like that. But the songs were another big part of they used in the soundtrack 80s songs, of course. My wife and I weren't religiously listening to American Top 40, but we are now, so it still fitted. She's an 80s Top 40, 80s pop aficionado. And so they would play a lot of different 80s songs that we knew, including Martika's Toy Soldier, which I always like. She doesn't like that track, but so I would say that for about 3, 4, 5 years, it was my favorite sitcom. At least it was pretty consistently good. I mean, they had some lesser enjoyed episodes, but for the most part, I didn't understand why people didn't mention it more. I know Blackish came on the next season, and Blackish got more popular, which we like Blackish too. Ended up watching that, but I guess between the two, I still lean more toward the Goldbergs. But and then I guess Adam F. Goldberg eventually left. They created Schooled, which kind of started slow, but got pretty good. And then it didn't get renewed after its second season, and we had really been won over by Schooled. It's too bad. It was a spinoff. It was instead of being 1980 something, it was 1990 something. So it was kind of 90s nostalgia, but also Everything Sucks on Netflix sort of had done a similar thing, kind of the way that Freaks and Geeks was in the 80s. Everything Sucks was in the 90s. But it was the school show was more about the teachers than the students. But School didn't make it. I mean, if things had gone better, School would still be on. I don't know how much longer it would have been on for, but they even had Barry Goldberg show up in a couple, because they had his girlfriend at the time. In Goldbergs, go on and become a teacher on Schooled in the 90s at the same high school in Pennsylvania. So, in Philadelphia. So School doesn't go, but I think around the time of School, getting canceled even before, Goldberg was starting to slide, and when Adam F. Goldberg left to do these documentaries he's done, he did one on Nickelodeon, he's doing one on Police Academy and some other stuff, and I just like a lot of shows like The Big Bang Theory and to a small degree, How I Met Your Mother was another one. It just got, and then of course when George Segal passed away, there was just different signals. They brought on Judd Hirsch to play, instead of being Pops, being Pops. Which I like Judd Hirsch, some of the stuff he's done, Taxi of course, but the writing, they brought the Jeff character who ended up eventually marrying Erica, Jeff Schwartz. He ended up becoming a regular in the cast, and and then Jeff Garland, this whole business with Jeff Garland, he ended up getting kicked off the show for Me Too stuff, more or less. I don't know. It was subtle, more like an Al Franken thing, but I don't know. But I think even before he was kind of and then eventually he got killed off. Spoiler alert. His father in real life does pass away. I believe he did pass away, but the show it was not at the same level for a few years before that, and but it had a good run. It got picked up for syndication, of course, and it's still on. So the finale they just did, and I didn't watch any of the last season. I maybe watched one episode. Was a Back to the Future themed episode, but it was really more like a normal episode. They just had a little montage at the end, which I don't know. I think they kind of just had to flub it. I mean, they didn't. I mean, they knew the show was eventually going to end, but I don't know. I guess I don't feel sad or disappointed with the way they ended it, because I kind of felt the same way about How I Met Your Mother, because I'd already kind of jumped ship, but looking back on it, it's still one of my favorite shows of the last decade. It had its peak, and I could actually go for watching the early episodes again. I don't know if I'm going to do that, because kind of like in limbo here, trying to figure out what TV I'm going to watch right now. But I don't know if I'm going to rewatch the early Goldbergs. But for what it was, it's for the 2010s. I always think of it as one of the best sitcoms, one of the best 80s themed sitcoms. The thing is, they did Schooled, and they do that 90s show, which was on one of the streaming networks, which people that love that 70s show. Because you start with Happy Days, which was made in the 70s and early 80s and set in the 50s. And Laverne and Shirley was, although I think Laverne and Shirley, when they at some point came out, it was in the present day. I can't remember, because Laverne and Shirley was a spin-off. Of course, Mork and Mindy, I know, was set in the 80s and also a spin-off of Happy Days. But the 80s, I don't know if there was a show set in the 60s. There probably is. I'm not thinking of it right now. There were some shows that were definitely set in the 60s historically. But anyway, so in the 90s you had that 70s show. So in the 2000s, you had Freaks and Geeks. That was like the early 2000s. You had a couple other shows that were set in the 80s. It's usually a 20-year gap. So now you have that 90s show, and you had Everything Sucks, but that was only for one season. There's some other. Again, I could do a more thorough, proper chronological list, but my guess is they're going to eventually have a show set in the 2000s, because it's been 20 years since the beginning of that decade. And I was thinking they would you'd see the advent a lot of with the internet, with a lot of the social media eventually. Harry Potter, like the biggest thing in the 80s was Star Wars, so Harry Potter would probably come up here and there. A lot of pop culture, entertainment would probably come up. I don't know. I'm sure someone who isn't actually working right now because they're on strike, but is like, for pro bono writing a script if they haven't already written a script for a show set in the 2000s. So part of it is you got to have the right people and the right writers, the right people making the show, the right cast. Because you can have a show. They did that 80s show, I remember, in the 90s, and it didn't do well. So anyway, what do you think of the Goldbergs? I mean, did you ever like it for shows that were set in the 80s? I know it was kind of flubbed because it was 10 years and they were going back and forth, and a lot of stuff felt like it was the kids were old enough where they're getting married. It would have been more like in the early 90s and stuff. I mean, there was Fresh Off the Boat. I forgot about that. Fresh Off the Boat was set in the 90s. That was made in the 2010s, but I can't remember. I thought there was a show that was set in the 60s, like a sitcom of some kind, that was set in the 60s that was made in the 80s, but I'm just not remembering it right now. So, but anyway, thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and we'll see you next time.